I was 14 years old when I filed the most important cartographic record in the history of the Varath Concordance, and I want you to know, before I tell you any of it, that I did not know what I was doing. I was not brave. I was not clever. I was a junior apprentice on my first deep survey deployment, certified for basic passive array monitoring and absolutely not certified for the secondary scanner suite I was using, and the only reason I survived was that nobody aboard the oblique record considered me important enough to put on the combat watch roster when the reconciliation advance moved in on the contact. That is the whole story, really. Everything else is just details. The oblique record was a survey tender 1,800 tons, 22 crew, a sensor array that could map a star system in 40 hours and produce charts accurate enough for concordance navigation within 6 months of calibration. She was not a warship. She was not even close to a warship. She was the kind of vessel that the reconciliation advance kept at its rear logistics spine specifically so that no one would ever have to worry about her. Survey tenders do not engage contacts. Survey tenders map things, file records, and stay exactly where they are told to stay. This was explained to me 3 times on my first day aboard, twice by the chief cartographer Sen Othavar and once by the advance commander's logistics liaison, a thin-faced officer named Corveth Tan, who had the manner of someone who had explained things to apprentices before and found the experience uniformly disappointing. The oblique record's assigned position in the advance's logistics spine was at the rear of the survey train, which was itself at the rear of the civilian specialist contractors, which was itself behind the logistics and resupply elements. There were approximately 40 vessels between the oblique record and the nearest engagement hull. Corveth Tan had explained this too, on my first day, in a tone suggesting I should find it reassuring. I had found it reassuring. I still found it reassuring, 14 years later, every time I thought about what had happened at 340,000 kilometers. I had been assigned to the oblique record because my examination scores in passive array analysis were the second highest of my cohort intake, which I later discovered was the sort of distinction that gets you posted somewhere like the oblique record specifically so that someone who already knows everything will have someone reasonably quick to teach. Sen Othavar was 53 years old, had been charting the Concordance's expansion vectors for 31 of those years, and treated my presence with the specific variety of patience that is almost indistinguishable from indifference. She taught me the array. She did not teach me the secondary scanner suite because I was not certified for it, and because the secondary scanner suite was, in her words, an instrument for people who already knew what they were looking at. I did not know what I was looking at. I want to be clear about that. The reconciliation advance was 12,044 vessels in total. I have the exact number from the logistics manifest, which I spent 3 days memorizing on the transit because Sen Othavar told me that a cartographer who does not know the composition of the fleet she is attached to is a cartographer who will eventually produce a wrong chart. 4,211 of those vessels were primary engagement hulls, the long, dark, sequential processor ships that the Concordance used to execute its neutralization doctrine, each one capable of identifying, classifying, and engaging a contact in the time it took most civilizations to hold a targeting committee. 3,840 were fire support platforms. 2,090 were logistics and resupply. The remainder were survey, intelligence gathering, civilian specialist contractors, and somewhere near the very back, keeping a respectful distance from everything that had weapons, the oblique record. I want you to understand what that number meant in context, because I did not fully understand it at 14 years old, and I have spent the years since learning to understand it. 12,044 ships was not a large reconciliation advance by the Concordance's historical standards. The Jethavar push of the previous generation had deployed 19,000 vessels. The Pale Margin Reclamation, which the Concordance's official histories described as the most efficient expansion operation in the Doctrine's 4-century record, had used 8,000 vessels to process 11,000 contacts across 6 star systems in 4 years. 12,000 was a middle-sized advance, assembled for an expansion vector that Concordance intelligence had assessed as presenting moderate resistance, which in the Doctrine's language meant more than minimal, but well within manageable parameters. The reconciliation advance had been assembled specifically for the Varath 12 expansion push, which was the Concordance's term for what happened when they decided a particular volume of space would be more useful if it contained the concordance and less useful if it continued to contain whatever was currently there. I had heard about Varath 12 expansion pushes before. The way you hear about things when you are an apprentice in a mapping program, and the adults are discussing serious matters in the next room, and they do not think you are listening. The concordance was good at expansion. The sequential neutralization doctrine was the reason. You locate the resistance, you classify it numbers, hull types, weapons capabilities, chain of command, and then you eliminate it in sequence, from most dangerous to least dangerous, and then the space is concordance space, and then the cartographers come in and make new charts with new names. It was a very efficient system. I am told it had worked 417 times before the reconciliation advance assembled for Varath 12. 417 times. I thought about that number quite a lot in the 9 hours and 11 minutes that followed our first contact with WRK, Theta 7. The contact appeared in my passive array at 0340 hours, ship time, which is the hour of the morning watch when the overnight survey sweep resets its baseline and runs a full volume confirmation pass. I was the only one awake in the array station. Sen Othavar had gone to sleep at 2,200 hours and had told me to run the reset sequence, log any anomalies with standard notation, and not to touch anything else. I had been running the reset sequence. I had logged 3 anomalies, all of them routine background radiation variants. A debris field scatter at survey grid Keth, 1-4 that had been there since the first Varath 12 approach mapping, and a gas cloud boundary displacement that Sen Othavar was going to be moderately interested in when she woke up. And then the passive array returned WRK, Theta 7. I did not call it WRK, Theta 7 yet. I called it Anomaly 4, which I logged in standard notation as follows. Survey grid position, Varath, Keth, 7, bearing 041 by 112, estimated range 340,000 kilometers from the oblique record's current position. Estimated range from the advance's lead cadre approximately 610,000 kilometers. The passive array was giving me a mass return consistent with a large structure, very large. Larger than anything in the Concordance's survey manifest for this volume, which should have had nothing in it larger than the debris field at Keth, 1-4. The array was not giving me a drive signature. It was not giving me a weapon signature. It was not giving me a power signature. It was giving me a shape, a long angular shape, 29.4 kilometers from bow to stern, sitting at exactly 0 velocity relative to the grid, and it had been sitting there. The array's back calculation suggested, for at least as long as we had been mapping this sector. The shape was not random. I noticed this because noticing shapes is what the passive array certification tests you on, and I had passed the passive array certification with the second highest score in my cohort intake, which meant I had looked at many recorded shapes and learned to read them. This shape was not a debris field, and it was not a gas structure, and it was not a stellar remnant. Its geometry was too regular. The 29.4 kilometer length was flanked by what the array read as structural projections, not the random scatter of wreckage, but repeated forms, like the ribs of something that had been designed to have ribs. I did not know what kind of vessel would have that kind of geometry. I did not know any vessel architecture that produced that specific kind of angular ribbed return at that scale. But the geometry was there, in the passive array return, and I logged it, because logging what you see is the first rule of cartographic notation, and I was following rules because that was what I knew how to do. I ran the anomaly through the standard classification lookup. This was protocol. Any large structure in an unmapped sector required a classification attempt before notation. The lookup ran for 11 seconds, which was longer than normal. And then it returned. Probable derelict, rec class, designation work, Theta 7, no further survey action required. Refer to advance intelligence for disposition. I typed up the notation. I flagged it as a refer forward item for advanced intelligence, as instructed. I almost went back to the gas cloud boundary entry. I almost did not do the thing that got me in trouble. The thing that got me in trouble was that I had been awake for 19 hours at that point. I was running on my 4th container of pressed grain stimulant. And the secondary scanner suite, which was sitting right there, right next to the standard passive array, which I was absolutely not certified to use, had a function that the passive array did not have, which was that it could run a hull composition analysis on a large return at extended range. I knew this because Sen Othavar had used it twice during the transit, both times on debris fields she wanted properly categorized before we logged them, and she had explained to me what it was doing while she did it, in the tone of someone explaining things they do not expect you to retain. I had retained it. WRK, Theta, 7 was 29.4 kilometers long and sitting at 0 velocity and had been classified as a derelict. And I told myself I was running the hull composition analysis because it would make the notation more complete, which was true. And also because I was 19 hours awake and the secondary scanner suite was right there and I had retained the instructions and I was 14 years old. The hull composition analysis ran for 43 seconds, longer than the 2 analyses I had watched Sen Othavar run on the debris fields during transit, both of which had returned results in under 15 seconds. I watched the progress bar on the suite's display advance slowly, and I told myself this meant the structure was more complex than a debris field, which was technically an observation within my certification, even if the instrument I was using it to make was not. Then it returned. Hull material, composition analysis classification pending. Spectral return does not match any entry in concordance material database. Surface temperature, 4.1 Kelvin above ambient. Drive configuration. No concordance recognizable drive signature. Weapons profile. No concordance recognizable weapons signature. Recommendation. Manual review. I stared at that for a long time. The Concordance's material database held entries for over 9,000 cataloged hull materials, including alien alloys, processed naturals, synthetic composites, and 17 categories of degraded structural metals from long-duration dormancy exposure. It also held entries for every known variant of hull degradation that could alter a material's spectral return sufficiently to confuse the analysis suite. Classification pending as opposed to composition identified or degraded match meant the analysis had run through all 9,000 plus entries and found nothing, not a degraded match. Not a probable match with uncertainty noted, nothing in the database at all. Then I went and woke up Sen Othavar, because I was 14 years old and she was the chief cartographer and that was the correct procedure. She was not pleased to be woken up. She was considerably less pleased after she looked at the secondary scanner suite output and ran it twice more to confirm it was not a calibration error. I watched her face go through several stages of expression that I did not have names for yet. Then she called Varath Concordance, the logistics liaison, which was the correct procedure for anything that passive survey returned that did not have a standard classification. Varath Concordance came to the array station in his off-duty clothes and looked at the output and used a word that I had heard before but had never heard used by an officer in a formal capacity. Then he called Advance Commander Threv. Advance Commander Threv was a short, precise, gray-haired officer who had commanded 3 previous reconciliation advances and had a reputation within the Concordance's expansion directorate for thorough sequential processing. She arrived in the array station 12 minutes after Varath Concordance's call, looked at my notation, looked at the secondary scanner suite output, looked at the derelict classification the standard lookup had returned, and then looked at me. "You ran an unauthorized hull composition sweep," she said. "Yes, Commander." "You are not certified for the secondary suite." "No, Commander." She looked back at the output, the classification pending line, the 9,000 plus database entries with no match against any of them. I watched her read it the way I had read it, and I watched the same series of expressions cross her face that had crossed Sen Othavar's face, except that the advance commander's expressions were more controlled and finished sooner because she had 31 years of service and 3 previous advances. And you do not get 3 previous advances by losing composure over sensor returns. She said, Send the full scan package to Advanced Intelligence. Note the apprentice's unauthorized operation in the log, but do not flag it for disciplinary review until after we have assessed the contact. Othavar run the composition sweep again with full range compensation. I want a second confirmation. Sen Othavar ran it again. The output was the same. Hull material. No concordance database match. Advanced Intelligence received the package 20 minutes later. I know what their assessment said because I read it afterward, in the official record, once I was the only one in a position to read the official record. Their assessment was as follows. WRK, Theta, 7 presents as a large derelict structure consistent with a long-duration dormancy profile. Absence of recognized drive and weapon signatures is consistent with a non-functional or partially functional status. Hull material anomaly is noted but may reflect compositional degradation over extended dormancy period or survey instrument error. Recommended disposition. Standard classification confirmed. Rec class. Advanced to process contact under Rec class protocol. Close approach survey. Salvage assessment. Disposal is appropriate. Rec class protocol meant the reconciliation advance would send a forward cadre to close range, run a full active sensor sweep, determine whether the structure had any salvage value, and then either flag it for recovery or mark it for disposal. It was the most routine contact category in the Concordance's expansion doctrine. Rec class contacts were processed between 50 and 100 times per expansion push. Nobody important went near them until the forward cadre had confirmed they were safe to approach. The advance commander designated the 4th cadre 314 vessels, the Advance's standard Rec class processing unit, to approach and run the active sweep. The remaining 11,730 vessels of the Reconciliation Advance held position at what the doctrine described as safe assessment range, which for a Rec class contact was approximately 200,000 kilometers. The oblique record was at 340,000 kilometers, which was farther than safe assessment range, which was the only reason I was alive. I watched the 4th cadre approach on the passive array. 314 ships, moving in the Concordance's standard Rec class processing formation, a broad cone, the survey elements at the front, the engagement hulls flanking, the assessment platforms at the rear. It was a clean formation. I had seen it in the training charts. I had studied it in the certification modules. It looked, on my passive array display, exactly the way the training charts said it was supposed to look. It was the formation that had been used 417 times before, give or take a cadre, and it had worked 417 times before, give or take a cadre. Behind the 4th cadre, the rest of the Reconciliation Advance held at 200,000 kilometers and weighted 11,730 vessels. On the passive array, they showed as a dense cluster of returns, each one a distinct signal, and together they occupied a section of the display that was visually very large. I had never seen a fleet at rest from inside before. Sen Othavar had told me, on the transit, that a Reconciliation Advance at holding position looks like a city looks from the air, not moving, but present in a way that changes the feel of the space around it. She had been describing something she had seen. I was seeing it for the first time, and she was right, and I thought about her description while I watched the 4th cadre close the distance and the 11,000 waited behind them. It did feel like a city. A large, dark, patient city with weapons. WRK, Theta, 7, on the same display, was one return, one signal. Sitting at the edge of the grid, 340,000 kilometers from the oblique record, and approximately 610,000 from the Advance's holding position, it did not look like a city. It looked like a point. At a range of 80,000 kilometers, the cadre's lead survey element transmitted the standard Rec class hail sequence, a broadband signal identifying the Varath Concordance's Reconciliation Advance, requesting the derelict structure to acknowledge if any functional systems remained, and noting that non-response would be taken as confirmation of non-functional status and the contact would be processed accordingly. WRK, Theta, 7, did not respond. The passive array showed no change in the contact signature, 0 velocity, 4.1 Kelvin above ambient, hull material, still unclassified. The cadre continued its approach. At 40,000 kilometers, the lead survey elements ran their active sweep, the full broad-spectrum emission that the Concordance used to get a detailed read on a structure at assessment range. Active sweeps take a structural return and turn it into a full three-dimensional map hull geometry, internal mass distribution, power source location, if any, material density profiles, any residual electromagnetic activity. It was the most thorough sensor tool the Concordance had, and it could classify a structure in 40 seconds. The active sweep ran. The active sweep returned. No classification. Spectral return inconsistent with expected derelict profile. Internal mass distribution does not match any known hull type. Power source. No Concordance recognizable signature. Recommend halt and reassessment. I saw this come back on the passive array feed because the oblique record's passive array was picking up the cadre's sensor transmissions, which is normal survey tenders track cadre sweeps as part of the cartographic record. I saw the not classified return. I saw the recommend halt and reassessment flag. I then watched the forward three elements of the fourth cadre continue their approach. Later, reading the official record as carefully as I could read it with my hands shaking, I found Advanced Commander Threvon's notation on this moment. She had received the halt and reassessment recommendation. She had acknowledged it. Her notation reads, cadre halt, not indicated. WREC class protocol allows for close approach confirmation sweep when initial active survey returns inconclusive classification. Contact remains at zero velocity, no threat indicators present. Proceeding with confirmation sweep at 15,000 kilometer range. This was within the doctrine. The doctrine specified that an inconclusive active survey on a REC class contact could be followed by a confirmation sweep at closer range before reclassifying the contact. It was a procedure designed for situations where instrument noise or debris interference produced a poor first read. It had been used before. The doctrine had worked 417 times. The forward elements of the fourth cadre moved to 15,000 kilometers. At 14,847 kilometers, WRK, Theta, 7, powered up. I know the exact range because the passive array logged it. I know the exact sequence because the passive array logged that too. I have gone back to that log more times than I can count, and I still cannot tell you how long it took because the array timestamps it in fractions of a second, and my mind was not processing fractions of a second at that moment. What I can tell you is the sequence of returns. First, power signature. A massive, sudden power reading that spiked across every wavelength the array monitored simultaneously. So large it briefly saturated the array's upper sensitivity band, and the display went white for a moment before the limiter cut in. Second, drive signature. A drive reading that did not match any Concordance catalog drive type, but that I could identify by its effect, which was that the 29, 4-kilometer hull moved. Not toward the fourth cadre. Laterally, at a speed that the passive array took 2 refreshes to confirm as real. Because the first refresh put the hull's new position 11,000 kilometers from where it had been, and the array's error correction routine briefly assumed this was a sensor fault and tried to correct it. It was not a sensor fault. Third, weapon signature, which I am not going to describe in detail because I do not have the vocabulary for it, and because Sen Othavar, who did have the vocabulary, was not in the array station when the weapon's signature appeared. She was somewhere else in the oblique record, doing something I will never know. And I have never been able to find words for what the passive array showed me in those seconds that do not sound like I am being imprecise. The lead elements of the fourth cadre began to lose contact synchronization at 0 hours, 0 minutes, 23 seconds after WRK Theta 7 powered up. This sounds like a cold and distant way to describe what happened. I am describing it the way I described it in the cartographic record because that was what the cartographic record required, and I was 14 years old and I had understood in the first seconds that the cartographic record was the thing I needed to keep running. because it was the only thing I knew how to do that had a procedure I could follow. And following a procedure was the only thing that was going to get me through the next several hours without disintegrating. I stayed in the array station. I kept the passive array running. I logged everything. Here is what the passive array showed me in the 9 hours and 11 minutes that followed WRK Theta 7's activation. The fourth cadre, 314 ships, ceased to exist as a functional unit in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. I know this is precise, and I want you to understand that the precision is not indifference. The precision is what the array gave me, and what I wrote down, and what I have carried since I was 14 years old. 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Of the 314 ships, the passive array recorded 47 as having transited the engagement zone. Whether those 47 survived in any meaningful sense, I do not know. The array was not designed to track individual post-engagement hull status at that range. What I can tell you is that 38 of those 47 signals disappeared from the passive array within the first hour after the engagement. The remaining 9 I tracked for as long as the oblique record sensors could hold them, and the last of those 9 disappeared from the array at what I logged as 3 hours 14 minutes after WRK Theta 7 activation. I did not stop logging. The reconciliation advance, the 11,730 vessels that had been holding its safe assessment range, began their response to the fourth cadre's destruction at approximately 17 minutes. After WRK Theta 7 powered up. I say approximately because for the first 17 minutes after activation, the Advance's command net was generating a volume of communication traffic that the passive array was picking up as a dense, continuous signal wash that I could not resolve into individual transmissions. I know, from the official record, that Advance Commander Threvon spent those 17 minutes attempting to classify WRK Theta 7 under the doctrine's combat contact protocols. The combat contact protocols require a classification to begin. A classification requires a match against the Concordance database. WRK Theta 7 matched nothing in the Concordance database. The doctrine could not begin. What the Advanced Commander did, in the absence of a doctrine-compliant classification, was what any commander in her position and with her training, and with her 417 precedents would have done. She ordered the reconciliation advance to engage using the closest available classification, which the doctrine's overflow protocol designated as UN-classified large hostile, and she ordered all 11,730 vessels to close to engagement range simultaneously, because the doctrine for unclassified large hostile contacts specified that overwhelming numerical superiority was the response to classification failure. This was within the doctrine. I watched 11,730 ships move from 200,000 kilometers toward WRK Theta 7 on the passive array. I want to tell you what I was doing while I watched this, because I think it matters. I was not panicking. I was not calm either. I think there is a state between panicking and calm that has something to do with the fact that when you are 14 years old and you have just watched 314 ships disappear in 11 minutes and 40 seconds, your mind makes a choice to go very small and very procedural, because the alternative is unworkable. I was running the array. I was logging. I was eating, mechanically, from a ration container that was in the array station because Sen Othavar kept them there for long watches. I was thinking, in the part of my mind that was not running the array, that the contact was 340,000 kilometers from the oblique record, and the oblique record was at 0 velocity, and I had not received any orders to change either of those things. And so the correct thing to do was to stay at 0 velocity and keep logging. Nobody called the oblique record during those 9 hours and 11 minutes. I think nobody aboard the oblique record except me was in a position to call anyone. WRK Theta 7 did not move to meet the reconciliation advance. This was something I noticed on the array and logged and thought about in my small procedural mind while the advance closed from 200,000 kilometers. The contact was at zero velocity again. It had moved laterally during the fourth cadre engagement, placed itself 11,000 kilometers from its original position, and then gone back to zero velocity. It was sitting there. It was running with a power signature that the array was reading as substantial whatever had come on when the fourth cadre reached 14,847 kilometers was still on, but it was not moving toward the advance. And it was not moving away from the advance, and I did not have the experience to know whether this meant something. I logged it. Contact remains at zero velocity. Power signature active. No change in bearing. It was patient. That is the word I have come to. 14 years later, and I am still turning the word over. Patient. It had been sitting at that grid position for at least as long as the Concordance had been mapping this sector, which the approach survey record showed was 7 months. It had been at zero velocity for 7 months. When the fourth cadre came within 14,847 kilometers, it moved. And when the fourth cadre was gone, it stopped. And now 11,000 ships were coming, and it was waiting. At zero velocity. In exactly the same way it had waited for 7 months, as though 11,000 ships and 7 months of silence were versions of the same patience applied at different scales. At 200,000 kilometers, the Advance's forward engagement hulls began their fire solution procedures. I know this from the passive array's reading of their active targeting emissions, which are detectable at range as a specific structured pattern of sensor sweeps. The targeting emissions started at 0 hours, 41 minutes, and continued for approximately 7 minutes, while the forward engagement hulls attempted to build a fire solution on WRK Theta 7. A fire solution requires a classification. I want you to understand this. I want you to understand it because it is the thing that I understood. Sitting in the array station at 0 hours, 41 minutes, logging the targeting emissions, eating mechanically from my ration container, that Advanced Commander Threvon had not understood, or had understood too late to matter. The Concordance's sequential neutralization doctrine was built on classification. Every step of the doctrine assumed a classification. The fire solution algorithm assumed a classification. The engagement targeting systems assumed a classification. Unclassified large hostile was the doctrine's emergency designation, and it generated a fire solution framework. But the framework had been designed for contacts that were unclassified at the start of the engagement and could be progressively refined as sensor data accumulated during the approach. It had not been designed for contacts that were unclassifiable because the hull material, the drive signature, the weapons profile, and the internal mass distribution all returned no database match. And the contact itself was not cooperating with the classification process by behaving the way contacts were supposed to behave. WRK Theta 7 was not behaving the way contacts were supposed to behave. I do not know exactly what the Advanced Commander was receiving from her targeting systems at 0 hours, 41 minutes. I know from the official record that she transmitted 3 separate engagement orders during the period between 041 and 048, each one formatted for a different targeting framework, and that all 3 were returned by the weapons systems with class mismatch. Engage command requires confirmed classification. I know that at 048 she transmitted a manual override command, which the doctrine permitted for unclassifiable contacts, and which generated a free fire authorization that allowed the forward engagement hulls to fire without a doctrine-compliant fire solution. The forward engagement hulls fired. I logged the weapons discharge at 0 hours, 48 minutes, 33 seconds. The passive array showed me the discharge patterns the Concordance's engagement hulls use, a particular emission signature when they fire their primary weapons, and 11,730 ships firing simultaneously creates a passive array return that I can only describe as large. The array's brightness scale maxed out for 3 seconds. I had to reduce sensitivity to hold the image. I watched the advance fire. I watched WRK Theta 7 respond. The contact's response is logged at 0 hours, 48 minutes, 41 seconds, 8 seconds after the advance opened fire. I have tried to understand those 8 seconds in the years since, whether it was reaction time, whether it was something else. whether it was the irremovable, which is what I came to call it in my head, before I knew what to call it, because it would not move, and would not be moved, making some kind of assessment before it responded. I do not know. What I know is that 8 seconds after 11,730 ships fired at it, WRK, Theta, 7, moved again. Not laterally this time. Through the advance. The passive array showed me a contact moving at a velocity that I logged and then flagged for confirmation because the first log read seemed like an instrument error, and the confirmation came back as confirmed. And the velocity I had logged was correct. I will not put the number in this record because I checked it against the Concordance's maximum recorded hull velocity for any known contact type, and the number I had logged was not possible. And the fact that something impossible was logged does not mean I should record an impossible number in the official cartographic record of the Varath Concordance. But I will say that WRK, Theta, 7, crossed the full depth of the Reconciliation Advances formation, 200,000 kilometers, front to back, in an amount of time that the array logged to 3 decimal places, and that the whole number of that amount of time was not large. The contact moved through the advance. Then it stopped. Then it went back to 0 velocity at a position 11,000 kilometers on the far side of the advance's rear formation, which the passive array showed me as a new contact position, and I updated my log accordingly. Contact position updated. Contact at 0 velocity. Power signature. Active. Still there. The advance fired again at 1 hour, 3 minutes. By this point, the formation had lost coherence. When a hull moves through your formation at the velocity WRK, Theta, 7 had moved at. Formation coherence is not a thing that survives the passage, and the second firing was not the organized simultaneous discharge of the first volley. The array showed me a distributed firing pattern across the formation, which meant individual hulls or small cadre groups engaging independently as they came to bear. This is not the sequential neutralization doctrine. The sequential neutralization doctrine requires organized engagement. What I was watching at 1 hour, 3 minutes, was 11,000 odd ships doing what they could, individually, against a contact they still could not classify, in a formation they no longer had, using a doctrine that required conditions this contact was not providing. WRK, Theta, 7 moved again at 1 hour, 3 minutes, 18 seconds. And again at 1 hour, 31 minutes, 7 seconds. And again at 2 hours, 4 minutes, 44 seconds. I tracked each transit across the passive array. Each one updated the contact position. Each one was followed by a period of 0 velocity, the irremovable returning to stillness, sitting where it had stopped, power signature active, waiting. The interval between transits was not uniform. Sometimes it was 12 minutes. Sometimes it was 28. I logged the intervals as well as the positions because the cartographic record is supposed to contain what the array showed me. And what the array showed me was a contact that moved and stopped according to a timing I could not parse, at intervals that did not match any engagement pattern in the doctrine's training materials. I noticed something else during the second and third transits that I logged in the cartographic record and have thought about many times since. Each time the contact stopped after a transit, it stopped at a position approximately 11,000 kilometers from the nearest concentration of advance vessels, as though 11,000 kilometers was a specific distance that the contact found meaningful, as though the contact was maintaining something, a margin, a gap. I do not have an interpretation for this that I am confident in. The 11,000 kilometer distance might have been a targeting consideration, or a sensor consideration, or something operational that I have no framework to understand. It might have been incidental, the contact moving through the advance and stopping when it had passed through, with 11,000 kilometers simply being where the advance's rear formation happened to be. But it was consistent. Every transit, every stop, approximately 11,000 kilometers from the nearest significant hull concentration. I logged it as contact stopping distance appears consistent at approximately 11,000 kilometers from nearest formation concentration. Pattern noted. Interpretation unknown. That notation is in the official record. Nobody has given it an interpretation in 14 years. I do not know if it was choosing the intervals deliberately. I am telling you what I logged. At 3 hours, 19 minutes. Advanced Commander Threvon transmitted a command that the passive array logged as a broadband formation command, the kind of transmission you use when you need every hull in your formation to receive an order. Regardless of individual communication status, I cannot read the content of a broadband formation command from the passive array feed. I know she sent it. I know from the official record what it said. The official record shows that at 3 hours, 19 minutes, Advanced Commander Threvon transmitted, "All hulls, hold current position, cease independent engagement, await classification update." The doctrine, even in its most distressed state, was still trying to find a classification. She was still trying to give the doctrine what it needed to work. I have thought about Advanced Commander Threvon many times in the years since. She had 31 years of service. She had commanded 3 previous reconciliation advances. 417 previous expansion operations had worked because the doctrine had worked. She knew, better than anyone, that the doctrine required a classification, and she had been trying to get one for 3 hours and 19 minutes, and she kept trying. I think about that. I think she deserves to be in this record for more than her error, which was not a failure of courage or intelligence or professionalism, but a failure of imagination. And I say that with all the sympathy I have, because I was 14 years old, and I had an imagination that the doctrine had not yet finished training out of me. And even I did not understand what I was looking at until 3 hours, 41 minutes. When WRK Theta 7 made its 6th transit and the passive array's hull count for the reconciliation advance dropped below 3,000, from 11,730. In 3 hours and 41 minutes. I stopped eating at that point. I am not sure why I mention this. It was not a significant moment in any sense that matters to the cartographic record. But I remember the ration container in my hand, and I remember putting it down, and I remember looking at the hull count and thinking, with my small procedural mind, the doctrine cannot do anything about this. The doctrine could not classify the contact in the first 14 seconds when it powered up, and it cannot classify it now, and WRK Theta 7 is aware of this in some way that the doctrine is not. And the reconciliation advance is going to keep sending ships at a contact they cannot classify until there are no more ships to send, because the doctrine does not have a procedure for stopping. I did not know if I was right. I was 14 years old. I am telling you what I thought, not what I knew. WRK Theta 7 made its 7th transit at 4 hours, 22 minutes, 11 seconds. At 4 hours, 22 minutes, the passive array's hull count for the reconciliation advance was 2,407. At 5 hours, 9 minutes, it was 1,119. At 6 hours, 03 minutes, it was 488. At 6 hours, 03 minutes and some number of seconds that I did not log because I was watching the hull count and not the timestamp, Advanced Commander Threvon transmitted a second broadband formation command. I know from the official record that this one said, "All remaining hulls, withdraw on bearing 041 mark 330, maximum drive, Concordance expansion command, to be notified upon transit to safety range." She ordered the withdrawal. 488 ships from 11,730. I want to tell you what WRK Theta 7 did when 488 ships turned and ran. Nothing. The contact went back to 0 velocity at its current position, 11,000 kilometers off the far side of the Advance's original rear formation, which was now the direction the 488 ships were running away from. The power signature remained active. The hull composition analysis was still returning. No database match. The contact sat where it was, at 0 velocity, and 488 ships ran. I tracked the withdrawal on the passive array. I was logging their bearings because they were Concordance ships, and the cartographic record should contain the last known bearings of Concordance ships. I tracked them for 3 hours and 8 minutes. I watched the hull count go from 488 to 412 as I tracked them, then to 371, then to 239. I do not know what was taking them. The passive array at that range cannot resolve the cause of individual hull loss during a withdrawal. The advance commander's withdrawal order had been issued at 6 hours, 03 minutes, and ships were still being lost at 8 hours, 44 minutes. Which is, I have done this calculation 2 hours and 41 minutes after the withdrawal order. I logged every one. At 9 hours, 11 minutes after WRK, Theta 7 first powered up, the passive array's hull count for the reconciliation advance reached 0. I sat with that number for a long time. 0. 12,044 ships, counting the 4th cadre and the logistics elements and the survey train and everything. The Concordance's reconciliation advance for the Varath 12 expansion push. 417 successful operations. 0. I was the only vessel the passive array was showing in the survey grid volume. The oblique record and WRK Theta 7 and nothing else. WRK Theta 7 was at 0 velocity, power signature active, hull composition analysis, no database match, distance from the oblique record, approximately 360,000 kilometers. Closing velocity, 0. I held my breath for a while, I think. Then I started the cartographic record's final entry protocol, which is what you run when the survey operation has concluded and you need to formally close the observational log. I had never run it before, because we had never concluded a survey operation before, and I had to look up the procedure. The procedure was, enter the survey end timestamp, enter the final hull count for associated advance vessels, enter the disposition of all logged contacts, and close the record. I entered the survey end timestamp, 9 hours 11 minutes after first contact activation. I entered the final hull count for associated advance vessels, 0. I entered the disposition of WRK Theta 7. For the disposition, the log required me to select from a list of standard categories: neutralized, withdrawn, unresolved, ongoing, or other. I read through the list 3 times. I selected unresolved. Then I looked at the passive array one more time, because the log required me to confirm the contact's last known position and status before closing. WRK Theta 7 was not at its last logged position. The passive array was showing me an empty grid. The contact was gone. 0 velocity to gone, without a transit event that the array had captured, which meant it had moved while I was looking at the log's procedure screen and not at the array feed. Or it had moved in a way the array could not detect. I updated the position entry to last known position, contact no longer present in survey grid, departure bearing, unknown, departure velocity, unknown, and I closed the cartographic record. Then I sat in the array station, on the oblique record, by myself, in a survey grid that had contained 12,044 Concordance warships 9 hours and 11 minutes ago, and now contained 1 survey tender with 18 crew and a junior apprentice who was not certified for the Dopdasons. Secondary scanner suite, and I did not know what to do next because there was no procedure for this. There was no procedure for the first 15 minutes. Then I found the oblique record's standard emergency protocol for isolated vessel status after advance loss of contact, which specified that the senior ranking officer aboard should file an immediate status report to Concordance Expansion Command and maintain current position pending response. I was not the senior ranking officer aboard. I was the most junior person aboard. But I had been in the array station for 9 hours and 11 minutes, and I had no idea where any of the other 21 crew members were, or whether they were in any condition to file status reports. And the protocol was clear about what needed to happen, and the protocol was a procedure I could follow. I filed the status report. I included the full cartographic log, all 9 hours and 11 minutes of it. I included the passive array data. I included the secondary scanner suite hull composition analysis, my unauthorized secondary scanner suite hull composition analysis, which I flagged as unauthorized in the report, because the protocol required accurate filing, and I was not going to falsify a Concordance cartographic record. I noted that WRK Theta 7 had been classified by standard lookup as Rec Class, that the hull composition analysis had returned no database match, that the contact had been engaged by 12,044 concordance vessels across a 9-hour and 11-minute engagement period, and that at the conclusion of the engagement period, the contact had departed the survey grid on an unknown bearing at an unknown velocity, and that its current position was therefore unknown. I classified WRK theta 7 inches the cartographic record as contact, classification pending, recommend reclassification from rec class. The concordance database still had the entry WRK theta 7 WREC class derelict. No further survey action required. I changed the no further survey action flag to a review flag. That was within my authority as the filing cartographer of record. I could not change the classification. Classification changes require a senior survey officer's authorization, and I was not a senior survey officer, but I could flag it for review. I flagged it. Then Corveth Ton came into the array station, looking as though he had been through something significant, and told me I needed to sit down somewhere that was not the array station and not look at the passive array for a while, and I told him I had filed the status report and closed the cartographic record, and he looked at me for a moment and then said that I had done well, which was the first time anyone had said that to me on this deployment, and then he left the array station again. I sat in the array station for a while longer, looking at the empty survey grid on the passive array. Then I did something that was not part of any protocol, which was that I opened a fresh annotation file in the cartographic record, and I typed in the annotation field for WRK theta 7's log entry the following. Note: this contact did not behave like a derelict. It waited. When the fourth cadre reached minimum classification range, it moved. When the advance opened fire, it moved again. When the advance withdrew, it stopped. The contact appeared to differentiate between the survey tender at 340,000 kilometers, this vessel, the oblique record, and the engagement hulls at closer range. The contact took no action against this vessel at any point during the 9-hour, 11-minute engagement period. The contact did not pursue the surviving withdrawal vessels until they were no longer present in the survey grid, at which point the contact itself departed. The contact could not be classified by concordance doctrine. It appeared to be aware that it could not be classified. This annotator is 14 years old and is not certified for the secondary scanner suite and may be wrong about all of the above. But the above is what the passive array showed me, and the cartographic record is supposed to contain what the array showed me, and so I am writing it down. Annotator, Sevet, Junior Cartographic Apprentice, oblique record, survey grade 1 provisional, pending certificate. I submitted the annotation. Then I finally left the array station and went looking for the other 21 crew members, and found 17 of them, and the 4 I did not find, I have never found. And that is also in the record now. In a different file, in the section of the Concordance's records that lists persons whose whereabouts are unaccounted for following an engagement event. Sen Othavar is in that file. I want you to know that. She taught me the passive array and she explained the secondary scanner suite in a tone of someone who did not expect me to retain it, and she is in that file. And I have thought about her more than I have thought about the 11,730 ships. Because 11,730 is a number, and Sen Othavar was a person who kept ration containers in the array station for long watches and had 31 years of charts to her name and is somewhere in the survey. Grid volume, around WRK, theta, 7's last known position, 417, previously successful expansion operations of experience, and nowhere left to apply it. That was 14 years ago. I am 28 years old now. I am a senior survey officer, and I am certified for the secondary scanner suite, and I have not been on an expansion push deployment since the oblique record limped back to concordance space with 17 crew and 1 unauthorized cartographic annotation, and a passive array log that took 11 months to fully review. The Varath 12 expansion push was suspended following the reconciliation advance's loss. There have been 3 subsequent review commissions. The sequential neutralization doctrine has been revised twice. WRK, theta, 7 remains in the concordance database as classification pending, review flagged, because the classification change I requested 14 years ago was authorized 18 months after my status report was filed. And whoever authorized it decided that classification pending was accurate and rec class was not, and that is as far as anyone has gotten. I was called before the first review commission 11 months after the engagement, when the commission had finished its preliminary review of the cartographic log and wanted to speak with the person who had filed it. The commission was composed of 7 senior officers of the Concordance's Expansion Directorate and 2 representatives from the Doctrine Development Board. They asked me many questions. They asked me whether the passive array had been properly calibrated at the start of the morning watch. It had been. They asked me whether I had tampered with the log at any point between the engagement's end and the filing of the status report. I had not. They asked me whether Advanced Commander Threvon had been informed of the secondary scanner suite's hull composition result before she ordered the 4th Cadre's approach to confirmation range. She had. The result was in the package I had sent to Advance Intelligence. The commission noted this. They asked me, at the end of the session, whether I had any observations to add to what was in the cartographic record. I told them about the stopping distance, the consistent 11,000-kilometer gap, the contact maintained between its stopped position and the nearest hull concentration after each transit. I told them I had logged it and given it no interpretation, which was accurate, and that it was in the record, which was also accurate. One of the commission members wrote something down. Another one looked at me for a long moment, in a way I could not read. I was not called before the 2nd or 3rd commissions. I read their reports when they were published. The 2nd Commission revised the Doctrine's Rec Class Contact Protocol to require a halt and reassessment when the active sweep returns no classification rather than allowing the close approach confirmation. Procedure. The 3rd Commission addressed the fire solution algorithm's behavior under the unclassified large hostile designation and added a new designation, Contact Class Unknown, with its own engagement protocol, which specifies that a Contact Class Unknown designation triggers an immediate doctrine suspension and requires expansion command authorization before any further approach or engagement action. Nobody has sent another advance to the contact's last known position. I have read every survey return from the volume around WRK, Theta, 7's last known position that has been filed in the 14 years since the engagement. The contact is not at its last known position. The contact has not been redetected at any surveyed position within the ranges the Concordance can currently survey. This means one of 2 things. Either the contact has moved to a position the Concordance has not surveyed and cannot currently survey, or the contact is at a position the Concordance has surveyed and the contact is not detectable at survey range, in which case the Concordance's passive arrays would return it as clear, and the contact would be somewhere in a clear grid, sitting at 0 velocity, 4.1 Kelvin above ambient, hull material. No database match. I keep the passive array record from the Oblique Record's 9-hour 11-minute log on a personal storage device. I have looked at it more times than I can count. I look at it every time a new survey return comes in from the relevant volume. And then I look at the passive array data, and then I look at the contact's last entry in the Concordance database. Contact designation, URK, Theta, 7. Classification, pending. Recommended disposition, review. Review flagged by Sevet, Junior Cartographic Apprentice, Oblique Record, Survey Grade 1 Provisional, pending certification. The certification came through 6 months after I got back. I am fully certified now. I have been fully certified for 13.5 years. The provisional flag in the original annotation is the only thing in the database entry that is not accurate anymore. I have not asked to have it corrected. It feels important that it stay. I was 14 years old. I did not know what I was doing. I ran an unauthorized sweep on a contact that the standard lookup called a derelict. I stayed in the array station for 9 hours and 11 minutes, and I logged everything. And the thing I logged had no classification that the doctrine could use, and moved at velocities the doctrine had no number for, and waited, while 12,000 ships tried to engage it, and then departed on an unknown bearing, when there were no ships left to engage, and it did not touch the survey tender at 340,000 kilometers. And I still do not know whether that was indifference or precision or something that does not have a word in any language I speak. I flagged it for review. That is the most important cartographic record in the history of the Varath Concordance. WRK, Theta, 7, classification pending, somewhere in a volume that the Concordance is not currently surveying, or somewhere in a volume that the Concordance has surveyed and believes is clear. Sitting at 0 velocity, waiting for the next sweep. 4.1, Kelvin, above ambient.